You remember the month it stopped making sense. Maybe it was a grocery run. You bought the same things you always buy. Nothing extra, nothing special, and you stood at the register and thought, that can't be right. Or maybe it was rent. You got the renewal notice. You read the number twice. You did the math on your salary and thought, okay, I just have to cut something. I'll figure it out. And you did figure it out. You cut the thing. You skipped the trip. You passed on the dinner. You did what you were supposed to do. And then, 6 months later, you were back in the same place, tighter, and you couldn't explain why. You weren't being careless. You weren't making bad decisions. You were doing everything right. That's what makes this particular kind of broke so disorienting. It doesn't feel like a failure. It feels like a betrayal. This video is about what actually happened, not opinion, not politics, numbers, mechanisms, and by the end, a different way to see it. Let's start with the number they keep showing you and the number they don't. The number they show you, 3.2%. That's the headline inflation figure that gets announced, reported, and celebrated. Inflation is cooling. You've seen the headlines. Maybe you even felt a small wave of relief. Here's the number they don't show you. Your rent is up 18% over the last 2 years. Your car insurance, up 22%. Groceries, not the basket they measure, but your basket, up 11 to 15%. Childcare, up. Utilities, up. The specific category of things you actually cannot stop buying, up consistently, faster than the headline. So why does the official number say 3.2%? Because CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is an average. It measures a basket of goods designed to represent a broad population. It includes things that got cheaper, technology, used cars in certain periods, some energy categories. Those cheaper things pull the average down, but you don't live in an average. You live in your life, and in your life, the things that got cheaper are mostly optional. The things that got more expensive are mandatory. This is not a conspiracy. This is a measurement problem that happens to hit the people at the bottom of the income distribution the hardest because they spend the highest percentage of their income on exactly the categories that inflated the most: housing, food, transportation, insurance. The headline number isn't lying to you. It's just not about you. And here's where it gets structural. Even if your employer gave you a raise and the data says the average was around 4 to 5%, there's a mechanism almost nobody talks about: the lag. Prices move in real time. You feel them the moment you swipe the card. Wages move on a delay. Annual reviews, budget cycles, HR approval chains. In a normal inflationary period, that lag is 12 to 18 months. What that means in practice, by the time your salary adjusts to where prices were, prices have already moved again. You're always catching up to yesterday. And when you compound that over 24 months, which is roughly the window we've been living in, the math gets brutal. If real costs rose 12% and your wage rose 5%, you didn't just lose 7%. You lost 7% on the full base of your spending, every month, compounded. On mandatory expenses you couldn't reduce. Run the actual numbers. On a $60,000 salary, that 7% real loss is $4,200 per year. Over 2 years, $8,400. That's not rounding error. That's a car payment. That's 3 months of groceries. That's the exact amount you've been trying to scrape back through budgeting apps and coffee cuts, while the structural drain kept running in the background, invisibly, automatically. That's not a budgeting problem. That's not a latte problem. That's a structural gap that opened up while you were doing everything correctly. And here's the part that almost nobody has said clearly. You didn't fall behind because you slipped. You fell behind because the floor moved. That's the mechanism. That's what happened. And knowing that matters, because you can't fix a problem you've been misdiagnosing. But before we get to the fix, there's one more layer, and this one is uncomfortable. Not because it's your fault, because it was designed to feel like it is. Here's something that happened at the same time wages lagged and costs rose. The messaging changed. Treat yourself. You deserve this. Life is short. BNPL, buy now, pay later, became embedded in every checkout flow. Subscriptions got cheaper per month and multiplied by 20. The friction of spending dropped to nearly zero while the friction of saving went up. And if you spent, which most people did because spending is how you cope when you're stressed and the culture hands you an easy button, you were handed a narrative to go with it. You're bad with money. Not, the environment was engineered to pull spending out of you. Not, stress and scarcity make short-term thinking neurologically inevitable. Not, the tools for delayed gratification require stability that many people simply don't have right now. Just, you're bad with money. I want to be precise here, because this is where I'm not going to give you a clean exit, and I'm not going to lie to you either. Some of the spending was avoidable. That's a fact, not an accusation. But the size of the gap, the actual mathematical gap between your income trajectory and your cost trajectory, that gap was not created by your spending habits. The habits made it harder to see. They didn't create the hole. And I'm not going to leave you in the diagnosis. Here's what changes when you understand the mechanism. You stop fighting the wrong battle. Most of the financial advice in circulation right now is optimizing for a world that existed 15 years ago. It assumes the gap between income and cost is primarily behavioral. Cut more, save more, compound more. That advice isn't wrong, it's just insufficient for the size of the problem. Because the real variable, the one that changes everything, isn't your spending, it's your income ceiling. And income ceilings are not fixed. They feel fixed because most people are operating inside a single income container, one employer, one salary band, one annual review cycle. And inside that container, you're always 18 months behind. Think about what that actually means structurally. Your employer sets your salary in January. By the time it hits your account in February, the market has already moved. The ceiling isn't a glass barrier, it's a delayed signal. And in a fast-moving cost environment, delayed signals don't just slow you down, they systematically bleed you out. Not because anyone decided to hurt you, because the system was designed for a slower world, and it hasn't updated. The people who navigated this period without falling behind, and there are people who did, they didn't all make more money to start with. What they had was income that could move in real time. Freelance, consulting, a skill that could be sold directly, a platform with leverage, something that adjusted with the market instead of waiting for HR. This isn't hustle culture advice. I'm not telling you to grind harder. I'm telling you the architecture matters. You've been seeing the wrong problem. The problem was never, am I disciplined enough? The problem was, is my income structure capable of keeping pace with a real-time cost environment? Those are different questions, and they have different answers. Let me give you a framework, not a product, not a program, a way of seeing. There are 3 categories of income. I'm going to call them fixed, floating, and leveraged. Fixed, your salary. Locked, reviewed once a year, structurally behind. Floating, income tied to output, hourly consulting, freelance projects, contract work, moves faster than a salary, still trades time directly. Leveraged, income that doesn't reset to zero when you stop working. Content, licensing, a productized skill, a small business with systems. It can be built from a salary position. It doesn't require quitting your job. Most people have only fixed income. That's not a moral failure. It's the default architecture. The school-to-job pipeline produces fixed income people by design. It is the most stable short-term option and the most vulnerable long-term position. And here's why that matters at scale. When the majority of the working population is on fixed income, their purchasing power moves on a delay, which means the economy can inflate faster than wages correct. That gap is not a bug. It is how margins get protected at the top while the squeeze is distributed across the middle. Nobody drafted a memo about this. It's an emergent property of the system. But the effect is the same. You bear the cost, and the architecture bears no consequence. The visibility advantage, and this is the part that's changed in the last 5 years in a way that's genuinely important, is that the infrastructure for floating and leveraged income has never been more accessible. Not easy, accessible. There is a difference. The barrier used to be capital. You needed money to make money. The barrier now is far more often clarity, knowing what skill you have that the market will pay for directly and how to surface it. The question isn't whether you have a skill worth paying for. You do. The question is whether it's visible. And visibility is a learnable, buildable thing. That's the leverage. Not a secret, not a hack. An architecture shift. From fixed to something that can move when the market moves. Go back to that moment, the grocery store, the rent notice, the number you read twice. You weren't wrong to feel what you felt. You were picking up a real signal. Something genuinely shifted in the structure of costs, in the relationship between wages and prices, in the architecture of how most people earn. You felt it before you had words for it. That's what the interpreter does. Takes the thing you're already feeling, the low-grade confusion, the quiet suspicion that you're doing everything right and still losing ground, and gives it a name. The name is structural lag, an income architecture built for a slower world, and a gap that spending habits didn't create and spending cuts alone cannot close. The question is no longer, what am I doing wrong? The question is, what do I build next? Because now you know what you're actually solving for, and that's a different starting point entirely.
Please like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what are you building next?